180 should be an integral part of our overall strategy to put an end to genocide in Darfur, and I commend Congresswoman Lee for her efforts on this legislation. Before I go to our first panel, I ask unanimous consent that all members of the Committee on Financial Services who are not members of this subcommittee be permitted to participate in today's subcommittee hearing. Per committee rules, we've agreed to limit opening statements to 10 minutes per side, but without objections, all members may submit written statements. I'm going to introduce the members of our first panel first, and then we'll go back to opening statements if there's no objection. Hearing no objection, that's what we'll do. We could not ask for a more distinguished panel on this issue than our first panel today. Joining us, we have Congresswoman Barbara Lee, a relentless advocate on Darfur issue and the author of the Darfur Accountability and Divestment Act. Thank you, Congresswoman Lee, for all your work on this issue. We're also joined by Congressman Frank Wolf, a tireless and widely respected advocate for human rights around the globe and senior member of the House Appropriation Committee, where he serves as ranking member of the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee, which has oversight of the State Department and other international programs and organizations, including the Peace Corps, USAID. Congressman Wolf is also co-chairman of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, a bipartisan organization of over 200 House members that identifies and works to alleviate human rights abuses worldwide. I welcome you both, and I recognize Congresswoman Lee for her testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you, our ranking member, and Congressman Frank, our chairman, for holding this very important hearing today, and also for your leadership. As a former member of this very subcommittee, it's truly an honor to come before you today to testify on my bill, H.R. 180, the Darfur Accountability and Divestment Act, better known as DADA. I also want to thank Congressman Wolf for his steadfast leadership and helping to make sure that the world knows that here, at least in the House of Representatives, this is a bipartisan issue. Genocide knows no party line, and we've worked together on many, many issues as it relates to Darfur and genocide. And so thank you, Congressman Wolf, and to all of the panelists who will be here shortly. 12 years ago, Mr. Chairman, the world stood by as nearly 1 million people were slaughtered in the genocide in Rwanda. The best our country could do then was, after the fact, to apologize for our failure to act. Many of us swore that another Rwanda would never happen again on our watch, but today, Mr. Chairman, it is happening again. Nearly 3 years ago, on July 22nd, 2004, Congress formally declared that the ongoing atrocities in Darfur constituted genocide. Again, this was a bipartisan initiative. Congressman Payne led the way with many Republicans, and we were able to finally do this monumental pronouncement, which it still, unfortunately, is a genocide that we are witnessing. Since the start of the conflict, it is estimated that nearly 450,000 people have been killed. 2.5 million innocent civilians have been displaced. And I witnessed this ongoing tragedy firsthand in January of 2005 when I visited the refugee camps in Chad and went into Darfur with two great humanitarian leaders, Don Cheadle, the brilliant Academy Award nominee, star of Hotel Rwanda, and Paul Rusesabagina, whose courage in Rwanda saved many lives. That delegation was led by Chairman Ed Royce of California. It was a bipartisan delegation, and again, we all witnessed the horrific acts of genocide and the results of those acts of genocide in these camps. In February of 2006, under the very bold leadership of our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, I visited the refugee camps again in another region in Darfur, and we saw all of the suffering around us. It had not gotten any better. We heard from people who had witnessed and fled from the ongoing genocide, and I can remember going into one of the camps where children had drawn pictures of of airplanes bombing the refugee camps, men on horseback with machetes and with rifles, and village huts blowing up in smoke and in flames. And these kids, of course, were traumatized. The men, women were also traumatized by what they had seen. And I was convinced then that these children did not lie. They told the truth. The Khartoum government was coordinating with the Janjaweed to conduct the rape and the slaughter that was taking place in these camps. Although a tentative peace agreement was signed in May of last year, it was not accepted by all parties. Rather than following through on this obligation, the Khartoum government has remained defiant, quite defiant to this day. Meanwhile, the killings continue, the rapes, the starvation, the dislocation, they all continue. The genocide is real, and it is happening on our watch. And the credibility of the United States is on the line. We have to be about action, not just talk. We must use all of the tools that we have available to end this genocide. And I believe at this point we've got to hit Khartoum where it hurts, and that's in their pocketbooks. As many of you know, divestment was a successful tool in ending apartheid in South Africa. It put our country on the right side of history when we finally, after many, many years, imposed sanctions on the apartheid regime in South Africa. Today, actually, my predecessor, Congressman Dellums, led that fight, and I believe the bill was introduced for at least 12 years before the Congress overrode President Reagan's veto in the early 80s. Today, state legislatures, colleges, and universities are all leading targeted divestment campaigns against companies doing business with the Khartoum regime. State legislatures in California, Vermont, Oregon, New Jersey, Maine, Connecticut, and of course your state, Illinois, which I believe was the first state, or Mr. Payne's state, with great competition there. We were a little slow, but California did come finally. We've all passed legislation mandating divestment of state funds from companies that conduct business in Sudan, and many more states are starting to follow in their lead. Divestment campaigns are ongoing in over 17 other states. Additionally, students, young people, students taking action now, Darfur Stand, better known as Stand, are driving their respective colleges and universities to divest from companies doing business with investments in the Sudan, from Harvard University and Yale to the University of California, my alma mater, and Stanford University, and many schools have all divested their funds from or placed restrictions on investments of their funds in certain companies that conduct business in the Sudan. In April 2006, the House passed H.R. 3127, the Darfur Peace and Accountability Act, by a near unanimous vote of 416 to 3. And I've got to commend Congressman Payne for working so diligently and effectively in a bipartisan way to make sure that this did pass and become the law of the land. Among a number of important provisions, the House went on record in support of specific language that I added in Section 11 of the bill, which empowered states to enact divestment legislation targeted at the Sudan without fear of being preempted by federal laws. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, a single senator in the other body objected specifically to this language, and in the interest of passing the larger bill, we compromised and pulled it out. Now there are signs that the divestment movement at the states may be in trouble and may need our help. And so this bill, the DADA bill, seeks to rectify this problem by including language that protects state divestment efforts from being preempted by federal law. My bill takes the divestment movement to the next logical step, and that is, of course, the federal government. This bill requires the Securities and Exchange Commission to take steps to identify companies listing securities on the U.S. capital markets that are also doing business in the Sudan, and to require these companies to declare the nature of their business operations. If these companies are propping up the Khartoum government in any way, or if they are engaging in the sale of military equipment or dual-use technology like radar systems, then my bill would prohibit the federal government from entering into new contracts or renewing any existing contracts with those companies.